Speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we all heard, transportation is important, and I appreciate there's been some changes made to this bill, and I think you're going to see some more green votes on this bill from our side, especially from those of us from Northern Virginia, with some of the changes that were made. But I think there are still some issues that I just want to point out with this very briefly, because I know everybody wants to go home. First of all, many of us don't like debt, and this thing still has a lot of debt in it. Many of these bonds are my 10-year-old daughter, who I just left this afternoon. A lot of these bonds aren't going to be paid off until she's 30 years old. That's not the way we've typically paid for transportation in this state. We typically pay for transportation with cash. And historically, there's reasons for that, which I'm not going to bore you with, going all the way back to Reconstruction. But the fact remains there's a lot of debt in here, and I think you're going to see some red lights on this bill because of that, because of the amount of debt. If I'd been here in 2005 when this debt was authorized, I may have not voted for 3202. But the reality is the prior assembly authorized this debt. This is speeding it up, and I think there are some valid reasons to maybe borrow some now and not later when the interest rates may be higher. However, I would also like to point out that this vote is not easy for all of us in Northern Virginia. I've looked at the list that's been provided of projects that may get funded. My district has a whopping $540,000 on this list. That's about 0.2% of the spending. My district is being asked to pay for a lot of money, and my district is going to see very little back. Fairfax County, according to my Board of Supervisors, is only getting 6% of the spending, even though we have 12% of the state and about 75% of the traffic. And I still think that it's, notwithstanding that, sometimes we have to do things that are in the best interest of the Commonwealth, but not our jurisdiction. And I intend to vote for this, but not happily. The last thing I'll say, Mr. Speaker, is that the VDOT has looked at what our need is. If you look at the VTrans 2035 report, it says that we need roughly about $6 to $7 billion of funding a year. I could spend about $5 billion in my district alone on roads and rail improvements. This is a drop in the bucket compared to what we need. And I think it's a mistake for our constituents to think that this bill solves our long-term need. In fact, it doesn't come anywhere close to that. It's a very small step forward. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of progress, but it's not what our Commonwealth needs. And I'm worried about the signal that it sends to suggest that we've resolved transportation. So with that in mind, and in celebration of the end of the session, I would just like to say that I brought the chamber a present. We have a cake, and my cake here, it has a credit card on it. It's entitled the Commonwealth Express Card, and if you'll note, the card here expires in 2034, so it's good for about 20 years. Our Attorney General here is in the middle. He can defend our credit, our debt, when we issue this debt. It's made out to our governor. And don't let it fall here. But I think this cake is symbolic, because what this symbolizes at the end of the day, what this symbolizes at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, is that we are telling our constituents they can have their cake and eat it too, and I think we ought to do that with them tonight. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.